So how does this happen? How can one single decision made in Washington, D.C. spark a coordinated global response from 5 of the world's biggest emerging economies? Well, today we're diving into the diplomatic firestorm that was kicked off by a set of U.S. trade tariffs and how the BRICS nations, that's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, decided to fire back. Let's get into it.
So what was the spark that lit this whole fuse? It was a series of really punishing trade tariffs coming from the Trump administration. Now, you have to understand, this wasn't some minor policy tweak. No, this was a massive economic shockwave, and it was aimed right at the heart of these powerful nations. A reaction wasn't just likely, it was pretty much guaranteed.
And we're not talking about an abstract threat here. Look at these numbers. For a country like Brazil, U.S. tariffs on their goods suddenly shot up by 50%. For South Africa, it was a 30% hike. Numbers like these, they aren't just lines on a spreadsheet. They represent a direct, painful hit to a nation's economy. And when that happens, you better believe diplomacy shifts into overdrive.
Right, so this wasn't just some quiet concern whispered behind closed doors. The tariffs ignited an immediate, a coordinated, and a very, very public backlash.
And this response? It wasn't random at all. From the very beginning, it had a clear coordinator. Russian President Vladimir Putin immediately started to steer the other BRICS nations, working to turn 5 separate problems into one single collective crisis that they could tackle together. Okay, so Russia's taking the lead, but what does that coordination actually look like? Well, what happened next was this remarkable, almost dizzying display of rapid-fire diplomacy.
I mean, within just 24 hours, the diplomatic phone lines were practically red-hot. You had Putin calling India's Modi, then Modi immediately calls Brazil's Lula. Putin's also on the line with China's Xi and South Africa's Ramaphosa. Look, this wasn't just a series of friendly catch-up calls. This was a deliberate diplomatic chain reaction, being forged in real time to build a solid, unified front.
But seeing all this frantic activity, it kind of begs a pretty big question, right? I mean, let's be honest. These nations are often competitors, even rivals. So is this a real, solid alliance, or is this just, a temporary marriage of convenience?
One expert analyst really hit the nail on the head. He argued that the BRICS nations are, quote, not so much attracted together as being pushed together. In other words, the real glue holding this thing together is that external pressure, not necessarily some deep internal harmony.
And you can really see these two sides of the coin here. The things pushing them together are powerful for sure. You've got that common threat from the U.S., this shared desire to protect their economies, and a general criticism of the West. But the forces pulling them apart are just as real. I mean, think about the serious border disputes between India and China, or the constant, quiet competition for influence in their regions. Their interests just don't always line up, not by a long shot.
So how in the world does a country navigate a situation this messy? Let's zoom in on Brazil for a second, because they use this really sophisticated two-track strategy to walk a very fine line.
Brazil was playing this fascinating double game. On one track, it kept the lines of communication open with Washington. It sent officials to negotiate, to try and get exemptions from the tariffs. That was track 1. But at the exact same time, on track 2, it was busy in the back channels building that unified front with its BRICS partners. It's a classic case of keep your friends close, and well, you know how it goes.
But let's be absolutely clear. Negotiating didn't mean they were just going to roll over. One policy expert put it perfectly, saying that Brazil's willingness to talk was, quote, not going to be at the cost of Brazilian sovereignty. That sent a really powerful message. We can talk, sure, but there are red lines you just don't cross.
Okay, so let's zoom out. Beyond all the phone calls and the negotiations, what's the bigger picture here? What could this one single trade dispute actually mean for the future of the entire global order?
According to some analysts, this went way beyond just tariffs. They argued that the U.S. was basically trying to invoke the rules of the jungle to replace the rule-based order that's pretty much governed global trade for decades. It was seen as this fundamental challenge to the whole system.
And that's the real gamble here for the United States. While these aggressive moves might seem to offer some short-term wins, experts warn they could be incredibly risky for America's long-term diplomatic relationships. You might win the battle over steel tariffs,
But you could end up losing the much, much bigger war for global influence.
Because here's the potential irony in all of this. Instead of dividing its opponents, these U.S. actions could actually end up doing the exact opposite. They could be the very thing that unites the global South, that fosters a deeper, more lasting distrust of the West, and that ultimately strengthens the BRICS group into a much more powerful political force. So, in an attempt to reassert dominance, the U.S. might accidentally create a more unified and more skeptical opposition.
And so, that leaves us with this huge, lingering question. Are we actually watching the birth of a new world order, one with multiple centers of power? Or is this just a fleeting alliance, born of necessity, that's destined to fade away once this immediate threat is gone? The answer to that question, well, it's going to define the global landscape for years, if not decades, to come.